All right. So let me introduce Sharon. She's awesome. She's one of our community ambassadors, a volunteer Blue Faery, born and raised in Waco, Texas. Sharon Dixon moved to rural Northeast Texas 30 years ago. Her careers include being a small business owner, preschool, kindergarten teacher, and an activities director, as well as a wife, mom, and grandma. After the love of her life, Jimmy, was diagnosed with liver cancer. She discovered her most important calling, being an HCC advocate. She encourages others as Blue Faery's community ambassador, raises awareness of HCC, works in her garden, and spends time with her family and fur babies. And I have been so blessed to know this woman now 3 or 4 years, I think. Welcome, Sharon.
Hello. I would like y'all to meet my husband. I'm Sharon Dixon. I would like y'all to meet my husband, Jimmy Dixon. Jimmy didn't believe that anybody wanted to listen to some old cowboy from East Texas, as he referred to himself. But he was wrong, because in the last 3 years, his story's been heard all over the world. And I think that y'all will learn from him too. In the 1990s, Jimmy was diagnosed with hepatitis C. He found out during a routine blood donation. And so he saw a specialist and found out he also had cirrhosis. Well, at that time, the treatment options for hep C were horrible, and he had no symptoms, and so he decided just to not do treatment. He wasn't told that he needed tests or ongoing surveillance, and the possibility of HCC was never mentioned. The only thing he took away from the visit he had with the liver specialist was that he would one day die of liver failure. Almost 20 years later, in December 2020, he started having severe pain in his stomach that went up to his shoulder. I took him to the ER, and they discovered he had pancreatitis. They had done an ultrasound followed by a CT scan before admitting him. And the CT scan showed there was a lesion on his liver. And so the doctor was concerned that the cirrhosis in the hep C had led to liver cancer. And so they wanted him to see a GI while he was in the hospital. Well, it was the week before Christmas, so it was difficult to find a specialist, especially in Sulphur Springs, Texas, if anybody's ever been there. The only GI we had at that time was out of town and couldn't come to the hospital. And so they did send a referral to him. But the problem was that the scheduling department didn't consider it an emergency because they had done another CT scan before they released him from the hospital. And that time they said they didn't see the lesion. And so they assumed that the first scan was wrong. Don't ask me why they didn't assume the second scan was wrong instead, but that's what they decided. And so when we called to get it scheduled, the first appointment was 3 months. And so in the meantime, he was having lots of pain though still. So we made several trips back up to the ER and to his primary care physician. And we kept telling them that the pain was going up to his shoulder, and mentioning, that he had hep C and he'd had cirrhosis, but they kept running tests on his heart and everything but his liver. At that time, we didn't know that the pain radiating up to your shoulder was a classic symptom of HCC. What's scary is obviously the ER physicians that saw Jimmy didn't know it either. His PCP was jumping through hoops trying to get an MRI scheduled, but the insurance approved multiple heart tests and even a mammogram, because after all, maybe he had breast cancer, but they wouldn't approve the one test that could have determined if he had liver cancer. So 3 months later, we finally had our appointment with the GI, and he immediately asked why we had waited 3 months to come see him. And but he ordered an MRI immediately, and of course the insurance approved that one. And so within just a few days, he'd had the MRI, and we found out that yes, he did have HCC. At the time, there was one tumor and some small satellite lesions. Jimmy had really liked and trusted the GI, and I did too. And so we decided to let him, take the lead, and he guided us through the HCC treatment maze. Because if anybody here has dealt with HCC, it's a maze, believe me, when you're trying to figure out what you need and what treatment to have and everything else. The GI had wanted Jimmy to have a liver transplant. I wanted Jimmy to have a liver transplant. Unfortunately, Jimmy didn't want a liver transplant. Because of the shortage of livers available, Jimmy didn't want to take one that he said that could instead possibly go to a younger person who hadn't had a chance to live their life, or to someone with children still to raise. Jimmy said he'd lived his life and it had been a heck of a ride, and so he wouldn't let the GI put him on the list. But he still continued to see the GI so he could treat Jimmy's esophageal varices and his hepatic encephalopathy, which are two things that you wound up with. If you have cirrhosis and you have HCC, you will probably find out what those are. The GI did refer him to an oncologist for this cancer treatment. The oncologist prescribed Lenvima as the first line of treatment, and Jimmy took it for several months, but it had horrible side effects. He lost 50 pounds, had terrible sores in his mouth, and had to keep going up and down on the dose because of that. So when he had the next MRI, it showed that instead of just the little satellite lesions, now there was tumors in both sides of his liver. And so the oncologist said that Jimmy only had a few weeks to live, and that our only option was immunotherapy, so maybe he could get, another 2 or 3 months. And so Jimmy just said, well, he would do that. So he started the Opdivo infusions. But his health continued to decline during the treatment. His legs and his feet were horribly swollen that looked like they were going to just burst. And the GI had added an extra diuretic and some different medications to try to help it. But his liver enzymes were way high, and his metabolic panels, it was just awful. Everything was off the chart. His platelets were down to almost zero, but the tumor markers were shrinking, which is what the oncologist was happy about and kept telling us how the tumor markers were shrinking. But his health was so bad that Jimmy couldn't even get out of bed. So I called the GI and was telling him, and he checked the blood work and the test and everything, and he said he felt that the immunotherapy was helping as far as shrinking the tumors, but because of the state Jimmy's liver was in, and probably because of the other treatments he'd already received and everything, that it was damaging his liver, getting rid of whatever liver function he had, and that it was going to put him in liver failure very shortly. And so we asked the GI, what would he do if he was in Jimmy's position? And he recommended hospice, but he told Jimmy that, if he changed his mind, there's nothing, you can always go back and start treatment. And so some of our family members were not happy when we told them that he had decided to stop treatment and go on hospice, because they felt that it meant that he had given up and was just ready to die. But that wasn't what it was. It was just we couldn't go on like we were, like we had no choice. When he met with the hospice team, they reassured us that their main focus was going to be on improving his quality of life and managing his pain, and getting his symptoms under control. Before we started hospice, his health had really deteriorated from the cancer treatments, and his pain level was very high, and he could hardly get out of bed. When Jimmy started hospice, his quality of life was horrible. With the support of the hospice team during that last year, his health improved, and he even gained back some weight and muscle mass. He actually felt like living, and the last year of his life was a blessing. By March 2022, just a month after stopping the treatment and getting on hospice, it was like a different person. Where he could work in the yard and everything again. It was just amazing. In fact, of our vow renewal, that was in April. That was at the end of April. And in February, the doctor was telling us that, basically he told me when we decided to stop treatment that I was killing Jimmy and he'd be dead in 2 weeks. But he was wrong. But he felt so good then. He was able to work in the yard and help me in the garden again. And like I said, with the help of our hospice, he arranged for us to have a wedding and renew our vows. And we attended a bunch of the local rodeos and street dances that summer. And once upon a time, Jimmy competed in those rodeos, and he'd won some of them. And so he always liked to go. And then on his birthday, his last birthday, September 10th, 2022, I was able to get tickets to take him to see American singer and songwriter Ray Wiley Hubbard and in concert. Jimmy had always loved him, but he never got to see him perform live. We had actually bought tickets previously to 2 different concerts, but his health hadn't let him go see him. And so this was really a blessing that time it did, and on his birthday. But we had a really great time, and it really meant a lot to Jimmy. And it's a memory I'll always cherish. That's it over here, there, where he's like got the sunglasses on and the black hat and the peace sign. Yep. I always cherish that memory. It was a great night. And our family ended up thankful for the love and the care that Jimmy received from the entire hospice staff. In fact, Jimmy asked the chaplain to speak at his funeral because they had become so close. And I think we had 6 or 7 people from the hospice at his funeral. Please remember, access is tough. Since we live in rural Hopkins County in the small community of Peerless, which isn't even on some maps, I'm sure even if some of y'all are from Dallas, I bet you have never heard of Peerless. The nearest town is Sulphur Springs, where there are no oncologists, no interventional radiologists, no liver specialist, no cancer center, etc., closer than an hour or an hour and a half away. We were very lucky that his GI was wonderful. He was very knowledgeable and very caring, because riding in a truck for a long distance was uncomfortable for Jimmy because of the cancer. And so he didn't really want to have to drive to Dallas all the time, for cancer treatment and things. So he decided to there was one oncologist that came one day a week to Sulphur Springs and had office hours. And that's the one that we decided to use because of that. Unfortunately, it turned out that he hadn't had many HCC cases. And that's one thing I've learned. Anytime, if you or anybody that you know that has liver cancer, when you're finding an oncologist, ask them, how much experience do you have treating HCC? Because they can be wonderful at treating breast cancer and have saved 100 people, but if they have never treated HCC, they're not going to know what to do, because it is so different. So we often found ourselves back at the GI's office because of our oncologist's lack of knowledge, asking the GI what we should do. I'm originally from Waco, and believe me, there is a world of difference between the care available in a large city and in a rural area. Don't assume. Don't assume you've been given all the information you need. We discovered that we did not know things we should have known. If you're living with a liver disease, you must have ongoing surveillance because it can save your life. The doctors treating Jimmy for his cancer were shocked to discover that he hadn't had any of the tests that would have found the cancer sooner. We didn't know anything about him. We didn't know that he was supposed to be getting surveillance. At the San Antonio Liver Symposium last year, we were told that approximately only 20% of patients that need it actually get the surveillance testing for HCC. That means there's 80% running around who should be getting surveillance that never do. It's like no wonder that it's often discovered in the late stages. Jimmy's was stage 3B when he was diagnosed. Don't let yourself be judged. Bottom line, no matter what choices you make, no one deserves cancer. Jimmy didn't deserve to get cancer because he liked tattoos and beer. I didn't deserve to become a widow and lose the love of my life at 59 because he liked tattoos and beer. There is definitely a stigma associated with HCC because of some of the risk factors. Lung cancer is the same way. No matter what may or may not have led to you getting cancer, no one deserves to be judged by medical personnel, by friends, even by family members. It's really sad that patients are afraid to seek treatment because of the reaction they can get. I know there were times when Jimmy refused to go to the ER because he didn't want to have to deal with the judgment. And it shouldn't be that way. I feel that the stigma might have been one reason why the original liver specialist back in the 90s wasn't more helpful or informative when they discovered Jimmy's Hep C. We've actually had an ER doctor tell us that we were wasting his time because Jimmy was dying anyway, so why were we there? He doesn't work at our local hospital anymore. Unfortunately, while you may have to experience the stigma, you don't have to tolerate it, and it won't ever change unless we speak up. I had to learn to speak up and become an advocate for Jimmy while he was ill. Now I share his story to be an advocate for every patient with HCC. If Jimmy could tell you something to take away today, it would be to cherish every day and never stop living. He said that cancer didn't beat him because he never stopped living. He did not let HCC or dying take over and consume our life. He focused on the fact that he was still alive. So whether you have 1 day, 1 week, 1 year, don't give up and have a pity party, as Jimmy liked to say, but live every day as long as you can, and he did. Jimmy lived up until the very end. Thank y'all for letting me share a little bit of my cowboy with y'all today.